The last school year was a disaster for many families. Kids were isolated at home, logging into Zoom classrooms, or they joined on site but were faced with weird new realities like face masks and plexiglass-framed desks. Many parents also became aware for the first time what their kids were actually being taught. So with Labor Day around the corner, it seems some parents are making different choices. That's according to our next guest, who's been looking at enrollment numbers, specifically in Indiana. He says private schools and Christian schools are gaining students at record rates. We're joined now by Tony Kinnett. You are a curriculum developer, educator, and STEM coordinator in Indianapolis, Indiana. And you're also the founder of Chalkboard Review, an education publication giving parents a window into children's education. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
So you've been crunching the numbers on school enrollment, and the numbers that you're seeing in Indiana are pretty interesting with respect to enrollment in Christian schools. You're here to share that with us. I know your report isn't out yet, so we're getting a bit of a preview on it, but can you tell us what is it that you're seeing?
The numbers are unreal. There's a pretty common fluctuation in regards to enrollment in private schools and public schools. The numbers go up, the numbers go down, usually by about 5 to 10 in a lot of smaller Christian schools. But this year, the numbers are up in many cases by hundreds per school. In one case in Greenwood, Indiana, the school has jumped almost double the number of students in attendance. It's wild. There's not really any other word for it.
So what do you think accounts for this?
Oh, well, a multiplicity of factors. Parents are really upset with a huge number of things going on in our public schools. They're upset with the quarantine that caused a huge learning gap in schools in the last year and a half. They're aggravated with critical race theory, social emotional learning. They're aggravated with children being required to wear masks regardless of vaccination status. All of these small issues have piled up and really put so much pressure that it seems this dam is bursting. And we see all of these small private Christian parochial schools growing by leaps and bounds, so much so that many of these private schools have to send messages to parents saying, we cannot accept any more students at this time. There's simply no more room.
Wow, and are these numbers just since COVID, or you've been looking back a few years, right?
So there's been kind of a steady incline over the last 5 to 7 years in some of the Christian and private schools that I've looked at. In some environments, especially in a lot of the bigger city Catholic schools, in Indianapolis, for example, there has been kind of a slight decline, but even those schools since COVID are starting to climb wildly in enrollment numbers.
And I saw from one of your tweets that you were saying it's suburban Christian schools that are really leading the way in all this. Why do you think that is?
Oh, well, I mean, there was this idea that inner city schools were kind of the worst of the public school sector, and that's kind of been a prevailing idea in the last couple of decades. However, it's amazing to see this kind of suburban shift away from these inner city schools and the public schools that are instructing their children and doing really quite a poor job of it, moving their kids into the closest option that they can find that's going to educate their children efficiently and effectively.
And so the numbers you've been looking at are specifically Indiana. Can you say anything about the trends nationwide?
Absolutely. The reason that I'm focusing this study on Indiana is first because I live in Indiana and I have a good relationship with a lot of schools in the state. Second, there are tens of thousands of private and Christian and other parochial schools nationwide. This would be an incredibly extensive study if I were to do this nationally. We might be looking at doing studies on other states. Indiana is kind of a good crossroads cut of the country. It's a good way to get kind of the initial data out to a lot of Hoosiers and people locally in the Midwest and nationally to get a broad picture on really what we've seen in a lot of schools around the country is this huge exodus towards Christian and private schools because the public schools just aren't cutting it anymore.
So do you think this also represents any turn to more religious, a desire for religious education, or is it just an alternative to the public schools?
I think that it's both, honestly. There's been quite a hunger in the United States over the last couple of years for a return to a solid moral structure, a solid community foundation, returning to some of the things that make the United States a phenomenal nation, which is heavily influenced by the faith aspects that bind us all together. I think there's a yearning for that. I think also in a lot of public schools, there's not a good emphasis on character building. It's all about what the children want and what they feel and how they're choosing to express themselves. Whereas classical education, often through a religious lens, shows students that they have a responsibility to better themselves and reach out to something higher. Also, I think that public education has proved to be such a dismal failure in the last decade that parents are simply looking for an alternative. So it's a yes to both.
Are you talking to parents as well, or are you just seeing high-level numbers from schools?
Oh, I've talked to probably about 50 parents in the last week who have expressed all kinds of sentiments of why they're leaving public schools for private and Christian options. And that's where I get all of the reasons that people are fleeing public schools to some of these limited seats in Christian schools. They're not plagued with the same kind of critical race theory, social emotional learning, all of these strange mandates, all of the weird new indoctrination principles that are really quite overwhelming in public education.
Do you have any anecdotes you could share with us from some of these conversations?
Oh, absolutely. I was talking to a parent from northern Indiana whose child was asked to identify his pronouns at age 7. And it really confused the young man. So he came home and he asked his dad what all of this was about. The parent, very upset, really enraged at kind of the stuff that's going on, found out that it was a national trend through our site, the Chalkboard Review, that's publishing all of these stories nationwide. And as quick as he could, moved his son to a Christian school in Lafayette where he's presently attending. And that's going on all around the state and from what we can see around the country.
And do you see that there's any movement of people wanting to run for school boards, or are they just bugging out entirely?
Oh, absolutely. One anecdote in particular, in Indiana, there are several different group structures of parents within multiple different kinds of counties in all different kinds of precincts, townships that are forming together to select school board members that will be running against many of the incumbents in the next couple of elections. And the amount of vetting that's taking place in the forum of what should be done in the school board, what should be done in hiring superintendents and school staff, as well as in Indiana, the school board does have authority over the curriculum in the schools. It's really incredible to see how many people are finally getting involved in school board elections beyond its traditional view as just a popularity contest.
Is there anyone else that you're aware of that's doing either the kind of research you're doing or research that adds other pieces to this puzzle to see if there's, sort of a change, a sea change going on or anything else like that?
Absolutely. And we see a lot of think tanks, a lot of institutions that are putting a lot of effort into kind of painting a clearer picture of what's truly going on in the education landscape, which you're not seeing in many education publications like Ed Week that are only kind of pushing one kind of a view, or maybe teachers union publications such as the AFT. Where you are going to get a more clear view of what's really going on in the country are through institutions like Cato, the Heritage Foundation, Manhattan Institute, Fordham Institute, as well as through the great work of people like Corey DeAngelis, who are really striving as hard as they can alongside us at the Chalkboard Review to give parents a crystal clear, without distortion view of education so they can make the right choice for their families.
Be sure to watch the entire episode, now available exclusively at epochtv.com, a new completely censorship-free premium subscription platform, brought to you by the Epoch Times. See you there.